Everything looked ordered and neat and wonderful and beautiful. Why can't the people who live on it get along? That's Ed Dwight looking down at Earth from the edge of space. But this video isn't really about him reaching space. It's about everyone who didn't. In 1961, President Kennedy directed Ed Dwight to enter the Aerospace Research Pilot School at Edwards Air Force Base, the Air Force program from which NASA selected its astronauts. He was the first African American to do so. Newspapers ran his photograph. Magazines put him on their covers. The story wrote itself before it had ended. Then came the actual work. The Aerospace Research Pilot School was not symbolic. It was rigorous, technical, and unforgiving. Nobody passed because of optics. Dwight trained. He met the requirements. He completed the program. The Air Force recommended him forward. Then 1963 arrived. NASA announced its new astronaut class. Among the names, Buzz Aldrin, Michael Collins, men whose futures suddenly had shape and visibility. Dwight's name was not on the list. No meeting, no explanation, no public rejection, just a roster with a space where his name wasn't. Sometimes disappointment doesn't arrive loudly. Sometimes it arrives as an absence and leaves the room before you realize it was ever there. Months later, Kennedy was assassinated. Dwight would later describe how the support around his candidacy seemed to leave with the president. But what he carried longer was something quieter. The understanding that speaking about it openly would allow people to look away, to call it a complaint, to dismiss the whole thing before it had been heard. So he didn't speak. He absorbed it, not because it hadn't cost him something real, because he understood exactly what saying so out loud would cost him next. He left, not with ceremony. He became a sculptor. Years became decades. He built over 132 memorial sculptures across America, bronze monuments to people history had tried to leave behind. People stood in front of his work without always knowing about the other life attached to it, the one that never launched. Then in May 2024, the phone rang. On the 19th, Ed Dwight climbed into a Blue Origin capsule at 90 years old. The flight lasted roughly 10 minutes. The waiting had lasted most of a lifetime, 63 years to be exact. When the capsule landed back in the West Texas desert, he stepped out with both arms raised. Not like someone who had won, like someone who had finally been allowed to put something down. In June 1967, Major Robert Henry Lawrence Jr. was selected for the U.S. Air Force's Manned Orbiting Laboratory program. Quietly, without much public attention, history moved again. Lawrence became the first African American chosen for a space program, any space program. He held a doctorate in physical chemistry from Ohio State University. He had over 2,500 hours of flight time. When reporters asked at the announcement whether his selection was historic, Lawrence said it was nothing dramatic, just a normal progression. He said he'd been fortunate. Training started. A destination exists now. Not yet, but close enough to hold on to. The destination never arrived. The Manned Orbiting Laboratory was never built. Lawrence trained for a station that would never exist, toward a launch that would never come. Days became preparation for something that stayed on paper. And then there was no more time to wait. On December 8, 1967, 6 months after his selection, Robert Lawrence died in an F-104 crash at Edwards Air Force Base. He was 32 years old. He had been in the back seat, instructing another pilot on a landing technique that would later become foundational to space shuttle operations. When the approach went wrong, the front seat pilot ejected and survived. Lawrence's ejection seat had a fraction of a second delay built in to avoid striking the first. That fraction of a second was enough. No launch, no delayed return decades later, no arms raised at 90. His name wasn't added to the Space Mirror Memorial at Kennedy Space Center until 1997, 30 years after his death. He is the only person in this video who never got a moment. No late chapter, no redemption at the end. Only preparation, then silence. Then you find 13 women. not dreamers, not symbolic candidates, pilots. Starting in 1959, 13 women underwent the same physiological testing program used to evaluate the Mercury 7, developed by Dr. William Randolph Lovelace, chairman of NASA's Special Advisory Committee on Life Sciences. The same isolation tanks, cardiovascular assessments, and psychological batteries. They were not tested to a lower standard. They were held to the same one. They passed. Jerry Cobb ranked among the top 2% of all candidates tested, men and women combined. She had logged over 10,000 hours of flight time. Lovelace's own data had already shown something operationally relevant. Smaller bodies require less food, less water, less oxygen. Women in isolation testing demonstrated greater psychological steadiness under confinement. These were not emotional arguments, they were practical ones. For a brief moment, the question stopped being whether they could do it. In September 1961, 12 of the women were scheduled for advanced testing at a Navy facility in Pensacola, Florida. Days before they were due to arrive, telegrams came canceling everything. No public explanation, no formal announcement. The program simply stopped. In July 1962, Cobb and Jane Hart went before a special congressional subcommittee. The hearing transcript introduced Hart as, verbatim from the official record, Mrs. Philip Hart, wife of Senator Philip A. Hart of Michigan, and also a famed pilot, as well as an outstanding wife and mother. Her credentials arrived after her husband's title. Cobb's statement was direct. She said they were not trying to start a battle. They were asking only for a place in the country's space future without discrimination. No action resulted. John Glenn told the same committee that the absence of women from the space program was simply a fact of the social order. The Soviet Union launched the first woman into space the following year. Wally Funk, the youngest of the Mercury 13 at 23 when she first qualified, finally flew to space in July 2021. She was 82 years old, more than 60 years after she passed every test the program asked of her. Most of the others never did. Suddenly, Ed Dwight didn't feel like an exception. He felt like part of a pattern. At various points in NASA's history, roughly a third of the agency's nearly 150 active astronauts had never flown. Some classes were told upon entry that it was genuinely unclear whether enough missions existed to fly all of them. Behind every launch that made the news, people who memorized the entire flight plan and never heard their name called. Backup crews who trained the same procedures as the prime crew, step for step, and stayed on the ground. Support astronauts who spent years rehearsing emergencies that belonged to someone else's mission. You can become one of the few hundred people in human history ever selected as an astronaut and still never leave Earth. For every seat on a rocket, there are people standing beside it who know every detail of where it's going. They just don't get to go. Story Musgrave's path into space looked different from all of them. Selected by NASA in August 1967, the same year as Robert Lawrence, the same year the Mercury 13's congressional appeal had already been quietly buried. Then nothing happened. Not for months. Not for years. 16 years passed before his first flight. He worked on Skylab. He designed spacesuits and life support systems and tools that other astronauts used on missions he wasn't yet part of. He served as the voice on the ground, talking crews through orbit while he stayed on the ground himself. In April 1983, he finally flew. The maiden flight of Challenger. He performed the first spacewalk from a space shuttle. He didn't act like someone crossing a finish line. He flew again and again. 6 missions in total. 30 years with the astronaut corps, the only person ever to fly all 5 space shuttles. No speech about vindication, no language about finally making it, just a continuation. He said later that he never thought of space as a destination waiting at the end of enough patience. It wasn't a reward, it was a calling, something that had claimed him before he had any proof it would ever choose him back. So he stayed with it for as long as he could. It just shows what it looks like to carry something without bitterness. Some people do that quietly for a very long time. Space remembers who launched. The others stayed ready anyway. Some waited decades and were finally called. Some waited and weren't. Some never had the chance to wait at all. They didn't fail the test. The test was never really what was being measured.